Imagine waking up on a quiet Saturday morning, only to find a smug stranger in your backyard declaring that your private pool now belongs to the entire neighborhood. No warning, no permission, just pure arrogance. That's exactly what happened to me, and what followed would spiral into one of the most outrageous battles with an HOA that you'll ever hear. Complete with drained water, furious neighbors, and police sirens cutting through the suburban silence. Before I dive into this unbelievable story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you the wildest HOA, Karen, and neighborhood drama stories you won't want to miss. And trust me, this one will keep you hooked until the very end. The day had started like any other. The sun had barely climbed above the rooftops when I walked out into my backyard, coffee in hand, and skimmed the last few leaves from the pool's shimmering surface. It wasn't just a pool to me, it was a sanctuary. My younger brother, Eli, relied on it to calm his anxiety. For him, floating in the water was like hitting a reset button after a long, stressful week. The water had a rhythm, a quiet promise of peace that no one could disturb. At least that's what I thought. That illusion shattered when I heard the sharp clack of heels against my concrete patio. I turned, startled, and saw her, Belinda, the newly elected president of the Briar Ridge HOA. She was known throughout the neighborhood for her smugness, her clipboard, and her uncanny ability to twist community rules into personal weapons. She didn't bother to knock, didn't greet me, didn't even hesitate. She simply pushed through my gate and stood like she owned the place. In her hand was a clipboard filled with papers. She held it high as if it were a court order, her lips curved into a triumphant smirk. Without preamble, she announced that my pool had been designated the official venue for the HOA's upcoming spring social. She called it a community event, as though the decision had been written in stone. To her, my backyard was no longer mine. It was a public gathering space, a playground for influencers and guests she had already begun inviting. I froze, my eyes flicking to the sign I had painted on my gate months earlier. Private property, no trespassing. It even had a sunflower painted around the letters, a little touch Eli had added to make it less intimidating. Belinda looked at it the way most people would look at spoiled milk. She didn't care what it said. To her, the HOA's word was final, and my objections were nothing more than an inconvenience. That was my first warning sign that this battle wouldn't be simple. Belinda wasn't making a request. She was issuing a decree, and she believed herself untouchable. She walked me through her so-called mandate, pointing to sections and subsections she had clearly typed herself. The words were a mess of invented authority, citing that the HOA had the right to designate prime community spaces for neighborhood benefit. She had underlined those words 3 times in red ink, as though repetition would somehow make them law. I pushed back, telling her plainly that this was my land. I paid taxes on it. I maintained it. No one else had a claim. But the look in her eyes told me the truth. She had already decided I was the enemy. And enemies, in Belinda's mind, were meant to be crushed. Later that morning, a notice appeared taped to my front door. Not mailed, not emailed, taped like an eviction order. Eli handed it to me with trembling fingers, his anxiety already spiking. The notice was an official reservation confirmation for our pool, listing the date, the time, the expected guest list, and even a statement that the HOA assumes use of homeowner restroom facilities. That was when my simmering frustration boiled into outrage. Still, I tried to handle it the right way. I called the regional HOA management office, hoping for some shred of sanity. Instead, I was told, in the flattest tone imaginable, that the board has local discretion and that I could dispute it at the next meeting. The next meeting wasn't for 3 weeks. The party was scheduled in 5 days. Belinda knew exactly what she was doing. She was playing the system, confident that by the time I had a chance to protest, the party would already have come and gone. But I wasn't about to hand over my sanctuary to her circus. No, if she wanted a pool party, she was going to need to find a new pool. That night, I went into the shed and pulled out the submersible pump I had bought for emergencies. As I set it by the pool's edge, a plan formed in my mind. I would drain the water, legally, quietly, And when Belinda showed up with her horde of uninvited guests, they would find nothing but bare concrete staring back at them. I didn't know it then, but that single decision to drain every drop of water was the spark that would ignite the storm. The first night after setting up the pump, I barely slept. The steady hum outside was like white noise, comforting in its persistence. Each gallon that drained felt like one less weapon in Belinda's arsenal. By morning, the waterline had already dropped several inches, the once shimmering surface now revealing patches of bare concrete. Eli stood on the patio in silence, staring as if he couldn't believe I was actually doing it. For him, the pool was a refuge, but he understood. He saw the determination on my face and said nothing more. On Tuesday, I drafted a formal letter on plain white paper, neatly typed, "Pool closed for owner-initiated repairs. Area off-limits until further notice." I signed it, sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to Janine, Belinda's right-hand enforcer, the woman who paraded her poodle through the neighborhood as if she were on a security patrol. I gave her a polite smile as she glanced at the envelope, and though she didn't speak, the curl of her lips said enough. Word would reach Belinda within the hour. The pump continued its work, and by Tuesday evening, the waterline sat dangerously low. The pool no longer sparkled. It looked hollow, its walls reflecting a grim truth. This fight was only just beginning. By Wednesday, my suspicions proved correct. Belinda wasn't just planning a party. She was selling it. Glossy, full-color flyers began appearing on telephone poles, mailboxes, and even slipped under doors. Across the top in bold script read, "Willow Creek's premier aquatic soiree, this Saturday." And there, in the center, was a picture of my pool. Not as it was, but heavily edited to look like a resort out of a travel brochure. Brightened colors, crystal blue water, sparkling highlights. The illusion of luxury. It wasn't just a neighborhood gathering. She had turned my backyard into her marketing scheme. Neighbors began whispering. Some were impressed, others skeptical, but the truth leaked quickly. Belinda was charging admission, VIP packages, reserved cabanas, catering, even exclusive access wristbands. She wasn't throwing a party for the neighborhood. She was running a business. And she was doing it all with my property as the centerpiece. Hank, the old mechanic who lived across the street, was the one who confirmed it. He caught me by the driveway, shaking his head with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "She's pre-selling tickets," he muttered. $200 for VIPs, $100 for regular. Says it'll be the event of the season. You'd think she was opening a nightclub. My anger deepened into something colder, sharper. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was theft, fraud. She was profiting off something she had no right to touch. I stood in my backyard that night, the pool nearly empty now, the pump's roar echoing into the quiet neighborhood. I imagined Belinda sitting at her desk, counting her pre-sale money, confident that I couldn't stop her. I imagined the smug look she'd wear when SUVs full of guests rolled up to my gate. And I made a silent vow. She wouldn't win this. Not now. Not ever. Thursday morning, I posted my own sign on the gate. Large block letters, laminated against the weather. Pool closed. Owner repairs in progress. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Beneath it, I stapled a photocopy of my property deed, the section clearly marked where the pool sat firmly inside my boundary lines. Proof for anyone who cared to read it. But Belinda wasn't about to back down. By Friday, her advertisements had doubled. Neighbors showed me her online posts, social media blasts promising the most exclusive pool event of the year. Photoshopped images of champagne flutes and floating pool loungers filled the screen. She even bragged about partnering with local influencers. The neighborhood was buzzing. Some were excited, others furious. Eli, on the other hand, was on edge. He hated conflict, hated the tension. Every time he looked out at the drained pool, his anxiety spiked. It was supposed to be his sanctuary, his safe place. Now it was a battlefield. The final straw came Friday evening. I found another notice taped to my front door, this one stamped with the HOA's logo, though clearly printed from Belinda's personal computer. It was labeled, "Final Reminder, Community Event Reservation." In bold text, it read, All homeowners must comply with board-approved events. Non-compliance will result in fines and penalties. That was the moment it clicked for me. Belinda wasn't just power-hungry. She was desperate. She had already sold the tickets, already collected the money, already promised the show. If my pool didn't host the event, her little empire would crumble. And that was exactly what I intended to make happen. Saturday arrived with a bright, unforgiving sun that seemed to spotlight the absurdity of what was about to happen. The air was warm, the sky clear, and the neighborhood buzzed with the kind of excitement that usually comes before a parade or a festival. But in the middle of it all, my backyard pool sat bone dry, nothing but pale gray concrete stretching from end to end. I had spent Friday night draining the last few gallons, sweeping the floor clean, and setting up one final sign: pool closed, owner repairs. No trespassing. The laminated deed hung beside it, clipped for easy reading. Everything about the space screamed off limits. Yet I knew Belinda well enough to expect that reality wouldn't stop her. At precisely 1:55 p.m., the first luxury SUV rolled up to the curb. A family stepped out, dressed as though they were heading to a resort. Sunglasses, bright polos, and sandals. The mother carried a tote bag filled with towels, while the father adjusted his expensive watch as if checking the time of a reservation. When they saw the drained pool, confusion spread across their faces. By 2:05, more cars arrived. A line of shiny vehicles stretched down the street, unloading guests who had clearly paid for what they thought would be an exclusive event. Some wore designer hats, others carried catered food trays, and several held glossy wristbands marked VIP in bold gold lettering. One by one, their smiles faltered as they laid eyes on the dry concrete pit that had once been a pool. And then came Belinda. She arrived like royalty, stepping out of her sleek sedan in full regalia. Oversized sunglasses, hair curled to perfection, and her ever-present clipboard clutched like a scepter. The moment her heels clicked against the pavement, her posture stiffened. She had expected music, laughter, and crystal blue water reflecting her success. Instead, she was met with silence, confusion, and a pool as empty as her promises. Her face turned crimson. She marched toward me, her clipboard shaking in her grip. For a moment, she tried to compose herself, plastering on a smile for the guests who lingered nearby. But as her eyes locked on the pool closed sign, the mask cracked. The fury beneath bubbled to the surface. "You sabotaged a community event," she shrieked, loud enough for the entire street to hear. Her voice trembled with rage, echoing off the houses. Guests turned to stare, whispering amongst themselves. Some were already pulling out their phones, recording the spectacle. I stood my ground, calm, steady, prepared. I held out the property deed, the legal proof of ownership, but Belinda didn't want facts. She wanted control. Her hands shook, her voice broke, and in that moment, I saw the panic flash in her eyes. This wasn't just about pride. This was about money. Because behind me, the truth was laid bare. She had promised these people a resort experience, and she had nothing to deliver. Every dollar she had pocketed from ticket sales was now in jeopardy. That was when she pulled out her phone and dialed. Her voice rose into the air like a siren. "Yes, I'd like to report vandalism and destruction of HOA property. The homeowner has illegally drained the community pool." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests exchanged nervous glances. Others grew louder, demanding answers. A few even pulled out their receipts, digital confirmations of tickets they had purchased in advance. The truth spread quickly. They had been scammed. Within 15 minutes, the sound of sirens shattered the tension. 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, and officers stepped out with professional precision. The neighborhood, once filled with anticipation, now bristled with nervous energy. Children clung to their parents. Guests muttered under their breath. Phones kept recording. Belinda rushed forward, her words tumbling over themselves as she tried to paint me as the villain. She pointed at the empty pool, at the signs, at me, her voice dripping with desperation. "He drained HOA property. He ruined everything. Arrest him." But when the officers turned to me, I didn't flinch. I handed over the property deed, my identification, and even a copy of the HOA charter. The taller officer, Officer Miller, studied the papers carefully. His brow furrowed, then smoothed. Finally, he turned to Belinda. "Ma'am," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise. "This pool sits entirely on private property. The HOA has no jurisdiction here." The words hit like a hammer. Belinda's jaw dropped, her clipboard slipping slightly in her grip. Guests began murmuring louder, some laughing bitterly, others demanding refunds. The illusion had crumbled. But the officer wasn't finished. He pointed out that calling 911 for a non-emergency civil dispute was misuse of emergency services, a charge that carried consequences of its own. Belinda tried to protest, stammering excuses, but the damage was done. Her authority, her image, and her scheme lay in ruins before the very people she had sought to impress. And then, the final blow came from the crowd itself. A man in a tailored suit stepped forward, a local attorney who had clearly bought one of her VIP packages. He held up his phone, showing the payment he had made. His voice cut through the chaos. "So, you sold tickets for an event you never had permission to host?" Belinda froze, her face drained of color. For the first time, she had no words. The crowd erupted. Shouts of refund and scam filled the air. Guests waved receipts and tickets, demanding accountability. Phones recorded every second, capturing Belinda's humiliation in crisp, high-definition video that would no doubt find its way online. I stood back, silent, watching as the empire she had built on arrogance and fraud collapsed in front of her. The empty pool behind me gleamed in the sunlight, not as a defeat, but as a victory. When the police cars finally pulled away, the street remained alive with murmurs, angry demands, and the shuffling of disappointed guests returning to their cars. What was supposed to be Belinda's grand moment had ended in public humiliation. Her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest like a broken shield. She avoided eye contact, her oversized sunglasses hiding the panic in her eyes, as she slipped back into her sedan and drove away without so much as a word. The Queen of Briar Ridge had been dethroned, but the shockwaves of her downfall had only just begun to spread. The neighborhood spent the rest of that Saturday buzzing with speculation. Guests who had traveled from outside the community left furious, their frustration spilling into online reviews and angry social media posts. Screenshots of Belinda's flyers circulated like wildfire, her false promises dissected in comment sections. Even her allies, those who had stood by her self-imposed authority, began distancing themselves, their loyalty collapsing under the weight of undeniable proof. By Sunday morning, the evidence was everywhere. Dozens of neighbors had posted photos and videos of the confrontation. Clips of Belinda screaming at the police went viral in local forums. The attorney's stern words about fraud were shared again and again, cementing her reputation not as a leader, but as a scammer. For the first time since she had seized control of the HOA, her power was crumbling, not from quiet grumbling behind closed doors, but from open, undeniable exposure. Inside my house, the mood was calmer, though Eli was still unsettled. He had sketched a small drawing of Belinda clinging to an inflatable pool float as water swirled away beneath her. He handed it to me with a shy smile, the first genuine sign of relief I had seen from him in days. We taped it to the fridge, a reminder that even in chaos, there was room for humor. By Monday morning, the final blow landed. The HOA bulletin board at the clubhouse, once plastered with Belinda's notices and mandates, now bore a single sheet of paper, resignation notice, effective immediately. Beneath it, another note from her loyal second-in-command, Janine, announcing her own resignation as well. The empire of clipboards and fines had collapsed in less than 72 hours. The board scrambled to recover. With Belinda gone, the power vacuum was impossible to ignore. Neighbors who had once been passive now stepped forward, eager to restore some sense of normalcy. A new committee was quickly formed, made up of calmer, reasonable people who promised to return the HOA to its original purpose. Keeping lawns tidy, scheduling the occasional potluck, and leaving private property alone. For the first time in years, Briar Ridge felt lighter. The tension that had hung over every mailbox dispute, every lawn inspection, every petty fine began to dissipate. Neighbors greeted one another with relief, no longer under the watchful gaze of Belinda's clipboard. Children played freely in front yards without fear of being scolded for unauthorized gatherings. Porch chairs returned to front steps. Wind chimes tinkled without penalty. And yet, not everything settled so easily. The guests who had been scammed by Belinda's fake event demanded their money back. Some threatened lawsuits, while others contacted local news outlets. The story spread quickly. A suburban neighborhood where an HOA president tried to hijack a homeowner's pool, only to be exposed and humiliated in front of police. News vans appeared outside the gates of Briar Ridge. Cameras pointed at the quiet cul-de-sac that had become infamous overnight. Eli hated the attention. He stayed inside most of the time, sketching quietly at the kitchen table, the sound of helicopters overhead reminding him that peace was fragile. For me, though, the attention only reinforced what I already knew. Sometimes standing your ground wasn't just about protecting yourself. It was about setting an example for everyone else who had been quietly suffering under the weight of a tyrant. By the end of the week, Belinda had vanished. Rumors swirled that she had moved in with relatives, unable to face the humiliation of staying in the neighborhood she had once ruled. Others claimed she was meeting with lawyers, desperately trying to shield herself from the financial fallout of her fraudulent ticket sales. No one knew for sure, but one thing was certain. She was gone, and with her departure, the neighborhood finally had room to breathe again. Standing at the edge of my now empty pool, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. The concrete floor, once a symbol of conflict, now looked like a blank canvas. Eli joined me, holding his sketchbook, and together we looked out over the silent space. For the first time in weeks, the air felt still, unburdened. But as I gazed across the neighborhood, I knew this wasn't the end. Power vacuums attract new ambitions, and not everyone was content to leave things simple. The HOA might have been calmed for now, but suburban politics had a way of resurfacing when least expected. And if Belinda's rise had taught me anything, it was that the seeds of control never disappear completely. They wait, quietly, for the next person willing to water them. The neighborhood might have felt lighter after Belinda's resignation, but the storm she left behind was far from over. It began quietly, with murmurs at the mailbox clusters and hushed conversations on front lawns. By midweek, those whispers had grown into outright disputes. Guests who had bought into Belinda's grand illusion weren't content to simply walk away humiliated. They wanted their money back. The first calls came from neighbors who had paid regular admission fees. They knocked on doors, cornered board members in driveways, and demanded refunds. Then came the VIPs, furious homeowners and out-of-town guests who had spent hundreds on promises of cabanas, catering, and exclusivity. Their anger cut deeper, sharper, because it wasn't just about the money. It was about the embarrassment of showing up in luxury cars, dressed to impress, only to find themselves staring into the empty pit of my drained pool. The HOA board scrambled, but without Belinda, they were powerless. The money had gone directly through her personal accounts, funneled under the pretense of event planning. Receipts, screenshots, and bank transfers circulated among the neighbors like pieces of damning evidence. Soon enough, words like fraud and lawsuit became commonplace, tossed around in living rooms and whispered over backyard fences. It didn't take long before lawyers became involved. That attorney who had spoken up during the confrontation filed an official complaint, dragging Belinda's name into the legal system. Others followed, their combined voices forming a tidal wave of pressure that no HOA board could contain. News vans returned, cameras eager to capture the ongoing chaos of a community tearing itself apart from the inside out. For me, the spotlight became an odd burden. Neighbors came to me with questions, with sympathy, with outrage. Some called me a hero for standing up to Belinda. Others muttered that I had gone too far by draining the pool instead of fighting her in a more traditional way. But one thing was certain. My backyard had become the epicenter of the storm. Every headline, every rumor, every whisper circled back to the drained pool that had sparked it all. Eli struggled the most. His sanctuary remained empty, a hollow reminder of conflict rather than a place of peace. He stopped sketching outdoors, retreating inside whenever neighbors gathered near the fence to point or gossip. His anxiety, once eased by the water's rhythm, now fed on the silence of bare concrete. I tried to reassure him that we'd refill it soon, that life would return to normal. But even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. The HOA, desperate to distance itself from Belinda's scandal, held an emergency meeting. For the first time, the community clubhouse overflowed with residents. Not the usual handful of retirees and volunteers, but a full crowd demanding accountability. The board members, visibly shaken, promised reforms. Stricter limits on presidential power, financial transparency, and, most importantly, a clear boundary between HOA responsibilities and private property rights. It was a step in the right direction, but the tension in the room lingered. Too many people had been burned, and trust was not so easily rebuilt. As for Belinda, rumors swirled like wildfire. Some claimed she had fled the state, hiding from lawsuits. Others insisted she was meeting with lawyers, plotting a comeback, her pride refusing to accept defeat. A few neighbors swore they had seen her car parked near the clubhouse late at night, as if she couldn't let go of the empire she had built. No one knew the truth, but her shadow remained, stretching across every cul-de-sac and front porch like an invisible stain. By the end of the month, the neighborhood had fractured. Some wanted to move on, to rebuild and forget. Others clung to their anger, demanding Belinda be held accountable in court. The once quiet community of Briar Ridge had become a case study in suburban dysfunction. Its reputation tarnished, its unity shattered. And through it all, my pool remained dry. Not because I couldn't refill it, but because I didn't want to. Every time I looked into that empty basin, I saw more than concrete. I saw defiance. I saw victory. And most of all, I saw a reminder that sometimes the best way to win a battle isn't by raising your voice. It's by refusing to give your enemy the battlefield they crave. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Belinda might have been gone, but the ripple effects of her schemes were still spreading. Neighbors were suing, lawyers were circling, and the HOA was hanging by a thread. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped low and the street grew silent, I couldn't shake the feeling that Belinda wasn't finished with us yet. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood tried to heal, but the scars Belinda had left behind refused to fade. The lawsuits piled higher with each passing day. Neighbors argued over who bore the blame, and whispers about the disgraced president never stopped. It was as if her presence lingered, even though she had vanished. At first, I thought the rumors were nothing more than idle gossip, the kind of stories people tell to entertain themselves once the initial drama dies down. But the whispers grew sharper, more specific. Neighbors swore they had seen her car parked at the far edge of the community, headlights off, just watching. Others claimed she was meeting with old allies at the diner outside town, plotting something. And then came the stories of late-night calls, homeowners receiving blocked numbers with muffled breathing on the other end. Most dismissed it as paranoia, but in Briar Ridge, paranoia had become a survival instinct. For me, the unease returned with full force. Every time I stepped into the backyard, I felt eyes on me. My pool, still empty, no longer felt like a symbol of victory. It felt like bait. Eli noticed it too. He had stopped sketching altogether, his pencils lying untouched on his desk. Instead, he spent his evenings curled up in the living room, glancing toward the windows whenever a car passed by. His anxiety wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about the uncertainty of what Belinda might do if she came back. The HOA board tried to project confidence, but the cracks showed. Meetings stretched late into the night, filled with arguments over financial audits, bylaw revisions, and security concerns. For the first time, homeowners demanded accountability not just from Belinda, but from the system that had allowed her to seize so much control. Some wanted to abolish the HOA altogether, while others feared that without structure, chaos would follow. It was a community divided, and division is exactly where shadows thrive. Then came the letter. It appeared in my mailbox one Tuesday morning, folded neatly in an unmarked envelope. No return address, no stamp, just slipped in like a ghost. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in the same precise font Belinda had used for all her official notices. At the top, in bold, were the words, "This isn't over." The rest of the page contained nothing but a date, 3 weeks from now, and the phrase, "The pool belongs to the community." My hands trembled as I read it. Eli, standing nearby, noticed my expression and asked what was wrong, but I didn't show him. He was fragile enough as it was. I tucked the letter into a drawer, locking it away, but the words burned in my mind. Belinda wasn't gone. She was waiting, planning, and she had chosen her battleground once again. The board dismissed the letter as a prank, but I knew better. The style, the arrogance, the fixation on my pool, it was her. No one else in this neighborhood had the gall to claim ownership over something they didn't pay for, didn't maintain, didn't bleed to protect. It was Belinda's signature, loud and clear. In the days that followed, small incidents began to unfold. Gates left ajar, signs torn down from fences, flyers, cheap copies this time, slipped under doors, promising a revival event for the community. They didn't mention a location, but the implication was clear enough. Neighbors began to talk nervously again, wondering if another confrontation loomed. The pressure mounted until even the calmest residents began locking their doors earlier, drawing their curtains tighter. The neighborhood, once relieved by her resignation, now lived under the weight of anticipation. If Belinda returned, it wouldn't be with clipboards and VIP wristbands. It would be with a vengeance. And deep down, I realized something chilling. The empty pool behind my house, the very symbol of my defiance, had also become a symbol of her obsession. She wasn't finished until she reclaimed it or destroyed me trying. The 3 weeks that followed crawled by with a suffocating weight. Each day felt heavier than the last, the air in the neighborhood thick with unspoken dread. Every conversation circled back to the same question. Would Belinda really come back? Some neighbors dismissed the letter as an empty threat, the desperate act of a woman clinging to lost power. Others stocked up on locks, cameras, and security lights, convinced she was planning something more sinister. For me, the waiting was worse than the confrontation itself. Every creak of the house at night made me sit upright in bed, heart pounding. Every unfamiliar car that slowed near my driveway tightened my chest. The pool, still drained and lifeless, loomed like a stage awaiting its final act. It was more than concrete now, it was a magnet, pulling every ounce of tension in the community toward it. The date on the letter finally arrived on a Saturday. The same day of the week she had tried to host her exclusive party. From the moment I woke up, the air felt wrong. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that makes shadows linger longer. I stepped into the backyard and felt it in my gut. Something was coming. By mid-morning, small groups of neighbors gathered outside, talking in hushed voices. Some lingered on porches, others clustered on sidewalks, their eyes darting toward my property as though expecting a parade of cars to appear. The HOA board members arrived at the clubhouse, visibly nervous, their voices raised in tense arguments that carried across the cul-de-sac. And then, just after noon, she returned. Belinda's car rolled into the neighborhood like a ghost slipping back into familiar haunts. A black sedan this time, tinted windows, gliding slowly until it stopped directly in front of my house. The doors opened and out she stepped, the woman who had once ruled Briar Ridge with a clipboard and a smirk. But this Belinda was different. Gone were the oversized sunglasses and perfectly curled hair. Her expression was harder now, sharper. Her pride bruised but her determination burning brighter than ever. Behind her came 2 men I didn't recognize, not neighbors, not board members. They carried boxes, clipboards, and folding tables. Within minutes, they began setting up on the sidewalk, handing out flyers that declared in bold, defiant letters, "Community Pool Revival. Today at 2 p.m. The audacity stunned even her former allies. Gasps rippled through the crowd of onlookers. The HOA board members rushed over, trying to intervene, but Belinda's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. She shouted about rights, about community spirit, about how no one man can hoard what belongs to us all. She held her head high, daring anyone to stop her. I stood in my backyard, staring at her through the fence, the drained pool stretching behind me like a symbol of everything we had fought over. Eli hovered at the sliding door, pale and anxious, his hands shaking as he clutched his sketchbook like a shield. By 1:45, more cars began arriving. Not as many as her first attempt, but enough to stir panic. Curious onlookers, skeptical neighbors, even a few of the same guests who had been burned before. They gathered near the sidewalk, murmuring, waiting to see what would happen. I had prepared this time. The deed was copied and laminated, the police non-emergency line already programmed into my phone. My signs were still posted, clear and undeniable. But none of that mattered to Belinda. She wasn't here to follow rules or respect boundaries. She was here to reclaim her crown. At 2 o'clock sharp, she stepped forward, lifted her hands to the crowd, and declared the pool open for the community. She gestured dramatically toward my backyard, as if unveiling some grand prize. All eyes turned to me, and there it was, the silence before the storm. Neighbors held their breath, waiting to see what I would do. Belinda stood tall, her expression daring me to challenge her again. The drained pool behind me gleamed in the pale light, a stage set for one final act. I felt the weight of every gaze, every expectation pressing down. My next move would decide more than just the fate of the pool. It would decide whether Briar Ridge remained trapped in Belinda's shadow, or finally broke free. The air around Briar Ridge felt heavy as I stepped out through my backyard gate and into the street. Every neighbor's eyes followed me. Some were hopeful, others anxious, a few skeptical, but all were waiting. Belinda stood at the center of it, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Her lips curled in a smile that reeked of defiance. She had returned not to compromise, not to apologize, but to reclaim what she believed was hers. Behind her, the two men she had brought set up a folding table stacked with wristbands and flyers. They acted like carnival barkers, trying to rally the hesitant crowd. A few curious neighbors reached for the papers, but most pulled back, wary of being burned twice. The memory of her first scam was still fresh, and trust was in short supply. I held up the laminated deed in one hand, my phone in the other. My voice carried across the street, calm and steady but loud enough for all to hear. I reminded everyone that this was my property, that the pool sat within my legal boundary, and that no HOA mandate could override deeded ownership. For emphasis, I walked to the edge of the empty pool and let the crowd see the proof with their own eyes. Belinda laughed, sharp and bitter, her voice rising with desperation. She accused me of selfishness, of hoarding resources, of betraying the spirit of community. She waved her clipboard, rattling off bylaws and fabricated clauses as if sheer volume could transform fiction into law. Her words echoed against the houses, but for the first time, they didn't command fear. They sounded hollow. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Some shook their heads. A few turned away. Slowly, the tide of public opinion was shifting. Where once Belinda's authority had been unquestioned, now it faltered, exposed for the farce it was. Then she made her mistake. In a fit of rage, Belinda ordered her two men to remove the barriers and open the pool to the community. They moved toward my gate, hands on the latch, preparing to trespass. That was the final straw. I raised my phone and called the police, my voice calm, my words precise. I reported an attempted unlawful entry onto private property, backed by documented proof of ownership. The timing was perfect. Within minutes, sirens pierced the air once more, flashing lights cutting across the suburban street. The same officers who had responded weeks earlier stepped out, their expressions firm, already recognizing the players in this ongoing feud. Belinda rushed toward them, words tumbling over themselves, painting herself as the victim of an unreasonable homeowner. But this time, the officers didn't humor her. They had seen the deed before. They had read the charter. They knew the truth. One officer turned to the crowd, explaining clearly that the pool was private property, untouchable by any HOA regulation. The other officer confronted Belinda directly. Her attempt to organize another event without permission, her harassment of neighbors, and her repeated misuse of emergency and community resources were enough to warrant official action. And for the first time, the clipboard slipped from her grip as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Gasps erupted. Some neighbors cheered quietly. Others simply stood stunned, watching the spectacle unfold. The two men she had brought tried to fade into the background, but the officers questioned them too, ensuring they had no claim to innocence. Belinda shouted, thrashed, and screamed about injustice, but her words carried no weight anymore. Her empire of intimidation had collapsed into the backseat of a patrol car. When the officers drove away, silence settled over the neighborhood. It wasn't the uneasy silence of fear, but the stunned quiet of relief. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversations starting in low tones, the tension that had gripped Briar Ridge finally beginning to ease. I stood by the pool, exhausted but resolute. Eli stepped outside, sketchbook in hand, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the beginnings of a smile on his face. He looked at the empty basin behind me and then back at the street where Belinda had been taken away. With a steady hand, he began sketching once more. This time, not of chaos, but of victory. The days that followed brought change. The HOA board, humbled and shaken, vowed to strip down its authority to the basics. Fines became rare. Lawn inspections vanished. For the first time, the neighborhood began to feel like a community again instead of a dictatorship. Neighbors who had once cowered under Belinda's rule now greeted one another with genuine warmth. As for me, I finally refilled the pool. The water rose slowly, shimmering in the sunlight, returning peace to my backyard. When Eli floated on the surface again, his face relaxed. I knew it had all been worth it. The war with Belinda was over. The neighborhood had survived. And in the end, the drained pool that had once sparked so much chaos had also washed her empire away.